Hello, everyone. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be talking about file management commands. In fact, the top file management commands. So, Nate, we got together and brainstormed things that we use all the time.
That we did. So we're kind of going back to basics in maybe the next couple episodes, right? So those of you that are deep into the terminal, you may see a lot of familiar commands, but stick around. Maybe you'll learn something you didn't know because Eric said he did before we started here, which is cool.
All right, so we're going to jump right into the terminal. And what I've done is I've created some files here in my home directory. And the idea was that I would have configuration files, and I'd copy them into my home directory. And I want to put them in this configs directory. So you can see that some of them are in there.
Yep.
And in fact, maybe we should learn our first command, which is ls. You saw me do it here to list the files in my current working directory. But we can
Yep.
also list configs. And so underneath the configs, I have all these alphabetic directories, subdirectories. And so we can see in my top level directory that there's networkmanager.conf, packagekit.conf, and vendorconf that didn't get filed under these alphabetic directories. And so maybe that's something that we start off with is taking these and putting them where they need to go. So Nate, what command do you think we should use to take these files and put them somewhere different?
So I mean, there's two ways to get this done. Although you said move, we want to take them away from where they are and move them to where they're going. So there is a command which is very similar to move, except it drops all the vowels. It's just MV, and you'll find that with a lot of Unix commands, Unix and Linux commands. It's just take the command and drop the vowels. A lot of these old school commands, anyway.
Yeah,
Right.
and
So,
so MV, and then we tell it the file that we're interested in moving,
yep.
and then we have to tell it something else.
I'm gonna tell it where it's going to.
Yeah, so we're going to put it in the configs directory, but not just inside the configs directory. We also want to put it down in the N subdirectory. And now if I do a list of my current directory, we can see that networkmanager.conf isn't there anymore. But if I ls configs N, there it is. So we picked it
Now,
up
here
with
we go.
move, and we put it down somewhere different.
Now,
All right.
for folks who want like confirmation before you move files, because sometimes you want that, especially for maybe the junior admin or maybe root, for example, right? You can add a flag, right? And that'll tell it when you go to move a thing, it'll ask you to confirm. Now, in usual Linux and Unix style, it doesn't force you to confirm, right? Out of the box, but you can enable it. I thought it was dash I. Isn't dash I?
It
That
is
didn't seem
dash.
to do it for you though.
Well, that's because it'll only confirm it if you're about to do something destructive. So if we
Ah,
were moving it to a directory and there was already a file with that name in there, that
right,
minus I flag would say, do you want to overwrite this file?
right,
Like yes or no.
right.
But if there's no conflict, it'll just go ahead and do it.
And it uses similar rule sets to like what Mac and Windows do, right? If you go to move a file that's going to overwrite something, you're going to delete something, it'll confirm. But yeah, Linux is very happy to just do what you told it to do and not ask you to confirm. Normally, out of the box. But a lot of
Okay.
people add that dash I to all the commands that root might run. It's like in root's bash rc file, right? So that if you're doing stuff as root, which you probably shouldn't anyway, it'll add those dash i's, and that used to be the default on RHEL. I don't think it is anymore.
I think it still is that we set up an alias where when the root runs the
Yeah,
rm command, they really run rm minus I. Or if root
right.
runs the cp command, they really run cp minus I.
I try
Um,
not to do things as root, so I've lost track of whether it's still the case or not. I do it through sudo. Anyway, I've gotten off track, and
right.
we're still in the critical path. It's going to be a great show.
That's right. So we finished moving our files where they needed to go. But one thing
Yep.
that you'll notice in the config directory, let me move it back up to the top here. It's all alphabetic. But in my working directory, I have all these numeric file names. So
Yeah.
I'm going to make a new directory or a new set of directories to hold these numeric file names.
Ah. So how do
And
we make a directory?
yeah, good question. We're going to use a command called mkdir for make directory,
Right?
and we tell it where we want to make it and what we want it to be called. So we're going to call it config 0. And we got one
Make
that's 10.
make sure breaks my comment before about all the vowels being dropped. Should be make dr. Come on. I'm gonna go back and slap these Unix people.
All right. So we're almost there. Okay. So here's our numeric directories, and then I could go through and like move things. But I could also, because a lot of them start with 0, I can use some wildcards.
Yeah, wildcards are great until they're not. So be careful with wildcards.
All right, so maybe we do something like a move 0star.conf to configs 0.
There you go.
Right, and that like pulled a whole bunch of them. And then we could do the same thing for ones that start with a 1 and the ones that start with a 2, which there's only one of them. So
Now it's a little beyond our sort of basics theme for today, but you could do this with like a loop, going through like 1 through 10 or 1 through 0
oh, I'll do you
through
one
a for.
better, Nate.
Uh-oh. What's he gonna do?
3. Oh man, I messed it up. So
I don't even tell what that was supposed to do, Scott.
so you see the command that it ran, it substituted
Oh.
number 3 for a 5, but it only did that once. I think I'm missing a character to tell it to do it globally throughout the line.
Ah, see, I told you, you guys might learn something new. Who knew that one?
All right, I'm
Oh
just
yeah,
gonna be
Rick
because
is
I
in the chat. He says you can also use arrays inside of curly braces to do things like that with Bash, because Bash will auto expand those wildcards inside of almost any command, right? You just have to make sure it's like escaped or parentheses or bracketed properly, right? Which is it's really powerful. Maybe we'll do another episode on just like wicked tricks in Bash.
all right. So I moved all my files except I messed up the ones that started with 5. I'm gonna have to undo that mess up. So
Okay.
why don't we cd the configs 3, and we can see there's my messed up content where I like put it in the wrong spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cd is another command that we've not used yet today.
Yeah.
Change directory,
Surprisingly. And
right?
there's a
And
lot of
so
cool little aliases, or not aliases, but shortcuts with CD. Maybe we'll talk about them in the critical path.
yeah, so we could do things like pwd. That's another one we haven't seen yet.
I meant deeper
So
dive. Sorry. This is the critical path. Anyway.
if you want to see where you're at, pwd prints your working directory. So as you
Yeah.
move your shell around to different places, you can always check where you're at with pwd. So we need to take these 50 Red Hat Conf and 57 Deja Vu Sans Fonts Conf, and we need to put them in the 5 directory. So we're going to move them again.
Yep.
And this time, I'm just going to specify which 2 I want to move.
Yeah, because
I
that's a
need
thing you can do. You can have a almost limitless list of files, and the last one is the destination, but everything before that will be the sources.
yeah, and so my destination is up one level into the configs
Yep.
directory and into the 5 directory underneath of that. So the dot dot is an alias that references up one level in the directory
Yep.
structure.
Go up one level, go to 5.
All right,
There you
so
go.
that better. All right, let's see some other critical commands. Oh,
We got all of them except for our feline friend.
well, we got a couple. We haven't
We got
copied yet.
everything, didn't we? Oh, we haven't copied.
We haven't copied yet.
All right.
So what if I want to make a copy of this 57 Deja Vu Sans Fonts Conf and call it 33 Deja Vu Sans Fonts Conf and put it in my current directory? right? So just to refresh, I'm currently in the 3 directory. So I'm going to take this
Yep.
file that starts with a 5, I'm going to make a copy of it and change its name to start with 3, and therefore it belongs in the 3 directory. All right, so I'm going to copy this file up 1 level, down into the 5 directory. The file I want to copy is 57 Deja Vu Sans Fonts Conf. Oof, say
Right.
that fast. And then we're going to put it in our current working directory. And this is what I want to call it.
Yep.
All right, so Nate, what's the difference between move and copy?
Well, it seems pretty obvious. Move is it gets rid of the existing source file and puts it in the destination directory. Copy makes a copy of it, just like a photocopy, from the source file to the destination. Of course, you can change the name while you're doing so, just like Scott did here. Or if you just did // at the end, it would have copied it without changing the name.
Yeah, or just dot would have also
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Now, I believe if you do things funny, like take several files and try to copy them to a single destination file, it'll tell you that you can't do that, if you're wondering. But if you go to a directory at the end, it'll put them in the directory, like Scott did with move earlier.
yeah, and so Nate's right. Like move, you're picking something up and you're putting it down somewhere different. But one of the
Yep.
other things I would like to point out about move is that it takes all the file metadata with it. So I
Right.
know in previous episodes we've talked about things like changing permissions, um, and when you're moving something, it takes those permissions with it, takes ownerships with it, takes SE Linux contexts with it. Whereas a copy creates a brand new file in wherever its destination is. So it snapshots the contents, but then all the metadata about that file is brand new.
Yeah, and it's important to note that copy, there's a flag that'll tell it to copy all that metadata, right?
That's
Maybe you
true.
just I was busy interacting with producer.
Minus A, I think. So it,
Yeah.
archive flag that keeps all that metadata with it too.
No, it's what is it? Copy dash P. I think it's P. Preserves permissions and preserves, and there's another one to preserve SE Linux contexts, if I remember correctly.
We'll look it up after the show, Nate, and we'll update our friends with a comment. How about that?
That sounds good. That sounds good.
I actually think the A flag includes minus P or something crazy like that.
It could. It could. See. There's so many ways to do things. Just like with our last episode about Vim editors and or Vim commands, right?
Right. All right. So a couple more quick commands before we move into a bunch more interesting things. I think
Yeah.
um, deleting files. So maybe I want to get rid of this 331 cantarell conf.
Because nobody who knows what cantarell is anyway.
Yeah, So
At
that's
least I don't. That means no one does, right?
and this is another place where Nate's minus I flag might be helpful because
Yeah.
without, uh, I said remove it, it removed it.
It's
Um,
just like, okay, let's go.
you told me to do
You
it, I
told
did
me
it.
to. Yeah.
And you can see that if we add in a minus I flag, right, before it does something destructive, it's like, are you sure? And your answer here is Y or N.
Right. 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 I guess it doesn't make that explicit, yes or no. What if you typed yes or no? Does it still work?
I've now tried it. And then our last one on our critical path is looking at the contents of a file. Now, I know that we've covered this
Yeah.
maybe on a episode as well, but we can cat a file and see
Yep.
what's inside of it. And after the transition, we'll be talking about a couple other commands, one of which will actually let us know whether we should use cat on this file or not.
Yeah,
So
and the other cool thing is cat is a great way. Well, cat is short for concatenate, right? I'm pretty sure. So cat can also be used to cat several files into one. So if you were trying to combine 2 or 3 text files into one text file, and it'll go in the order that you specify them. So if I did like cat file one, cat file one, file two, and then redirected to an output file, it'll take file one and file two and put them like that into the other file. So, yeah, we've gone so long in the critical path, though. I think we ought to just continue on into the commands. But um,
Well, before we do that,
yes,
don't forget, if you like the content, hit that like button. If you want to subscribe so you get notified when we're doing stuff like this, subscribe to the channel. And if you think you know somebody that might be benefiting from this information, share it with them. And we'll just keep making the content. All right, Nate.
absolutely,
So we're not going to transition, but we are going to talk about more stuff. So
absolutely,
just talking about whether we should use concatenate on a file or not.
right.
Why
It's
is
going to
that
depend on a number of things. Sorry, what'd you say? I missed what you said because I was talking
important?
over you. I still missed what you said. You broke up.
Why is that important?
Why is it important to be able to combine files with cat? Is that what you mean?
To know what
Oh.
file you're looking at with cat.
Oh, right. So cat only works well with text files. If you were to cat a binary file, you just get like gibberish on the screen, which is essentially compiled bitcode, right? And it'll sometimes, I don't know if this is still a problem or not, but sometimes if you would cat a binary file, it would like mess up your terminal. You'd have to reset, log out, log back in, right? I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. But a good way to know what a file is, right? Because on other operating systems, there's lots of data that will tell you what a file is just by looking at it. For example, on Windows, there's usually an extension. On Mac OS, there's usually an icon that gives you some idea, or there's extended attributes on there that'll tell you. Linux has similar extended attributes, but you can't see them easily just by doing an ls or an ls-l. You can see if a file is executable, which might give you an idea that it might be a binary or it might be an executable script file. But there's a great tool called file that if you run file and then the name of the file you're looking at, it'll read some of that metadata and tell you what type of file it is. So right there, it says it's an ASCII text. But if you were to do a file on like, I don't know, bin ls, it should give you some idea that it's an executable. Right. Pi. There's pi in there. I didn't know
Indeed.
there was pi in ls.
Um, so the file command also tells you some more stuff, right? Like not just that it's an executable, but
Yeah.
that it's a 64-bit compiled executable that's dynamically linked, not statically linked. Um, and it gives you a couple other things. It's a
Yeah.
strict binary, for example, which most people probably don't care about, but I'm a nerd.
Right, right. But it's really useful information, especially when you're just getting started, because you're looking at files. You may be coming from an environment that did tell you intuitively what type of file you were looking at, and the Linux command line doesn't. Now, a Linux GUI will, right? Going back to Scott's argument about GUIs on servers, but the Linux command line really doesn't make it obvious. So that's why that exists.
Yeah, and there's an old adage with Unix and Linux, which is everything is a file,
Right.
and it didn't matter what thing it was. So, for example, we could look at that
Yeah.
SDA as our device file representing our hard disk,
Right.
but there's no file extension or other things that tell us that. Even the
Right.
location of where it might be, like dev, maybe it's devices, but you don't necessarily know. But file will look at the header of that thing and tell you what it is.
Right.
Because you wouldn't want to like open dev SDA with a text editor, for example. That'd
Or
be a
cat it.
bad thing. Yeah, or cat it. Uh, that would mess up your prompt and or your shell, and you'd have
I
to reset it.
I would think. I would think. Also, never direct things to those devices because if you do, you could just it'll happily be like, okay, I'll start writing that data to your hard drive raw, totally mess up your partition table, and basically make your disk unusable. Not unusable, but make your data unreadable.
Well, there's a reason why I'm doing these things as the unprivileged RHEL user account on this box, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
wouldn't be able to do that as a unprivileged user. As root, you can do whatever you want, including silly
Yeah.
things. Will mangle your machine. But as a regular
Like DD
person,
zeros over dev SDA.
let's, let's not give ideas, Nate. All right. But we have some other files, some other commands to take a look at too. So Nate,
Oh, wait,
what's
we
another
have quite a few.
file? Yeah, yeah.
Should we just go to the top of the list? I mean, there's one you listed here, I think, just to troll people. So
I mean,
folks coming from a DOS or Windows background will recognize that ls is not the command you use there to get file listings, even though that's completely the right way to do it. There's also on those there's dir, which stands for directory, right? Means it listing the directory. Well, that exists on Linux as well. Although I always thought it was just an alias. Apparently, it's not.
no, it's like a legitimate command with options to do things. But notice that it does behave a little bit differently. So RLS is actually an alias that uses ls dash dash color to colorize the output to try and look at things like file type and other components to give you a little bit more idea of what you're working with. Dir,
Yeah,
though, just like, here's your directory listing. There you go. Um, but yeah, it's there, I think, to be a assistant to people who may be coming
yeah.
from a different
Does
operating
it
system.
does it share any of the command line switches with the MS DOS version of dir, or is it
I
just
mean,
basically synonyms for ls?
let me ask 30 years ago, Scott McBrien, about options for dir when he
We'll
used
just do
MS-DOS.
like a dir dash dash help and let's see what it says. Oh, it has an exit status and everything.
Well, that's like a real command.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I don't know if this is the
Eh,
same options as regular dir for
no,
Windows.
this is more similar to the options for ls. So okay, no. So the similarity ends there. If you type dir, you'll get a you'll get a response. But if you try to use the flags you're used to, it won't work. Okay.
So we do have another one at the top.
Yep. So touch, and this is just like, I've touched a thing, therefore it exists now, right? It's how you can make a new empty file. Now you might wonder, why the heck would you want a new empty file? Well, there's lots of use cases for why you would want to quickly create a new empty file, for things like one process notifying another one or one script notifying another one, right? You can touch a file and then it's like, oh, that's my status indicator that a certain thing has been reached, right? You have any other great use cases for touch?
Actually, yes. So it's actually the existence of a file is sometimes used for things.
Right,
Or the other thing that touch does is it updates the timestamps on a
right.
file.
Yep.
So one of the things I'm thinking of is the Anacron subsystem. Anacron
Hmm.
is there to catch you up on cron jobs if your machine has been turned off. Well, the way that Anacron works is it looks for the existence of a file, and if the file doesn't exist, then the cron jobs haven't been run, so it'll run them. The other thing it can look at is the timestamp on a file to figure out if the cron jobs have been run, but not recently enough, in which case it will
Right.
run the cron jobs.
Yep.
So, does a file exist? What are the timestamps on the file? Those are things that other processes on the machine can make decisions based off of. And that ties us into another command that's a little bit further down the list, Nate. I don't know if you've seen it before.
Probably, but I don't know where you're going. Stat. Okay.
So we use things like ls to look at files or an
Yep.
ls-l, a long listing to look at files. But stat looks at the same metadata, but it arranges it a little bit differently and includes some additional metadata we may not see with an ls. For example, um, there are 3 timestamps associated with a file. Actually, 4. You can see the fourth one down there too. Last access time, this last time somebody opened the file and looked at its contents, right? It read the file. Modified, so somebody changed the contents in the file. They used an editor and updated it. They redirected something into it to change the contents stored in the file. Last change time, a property of this file was changed. Somebody updated its permissions. Somebody updated its ownerships. That's a change. And then you see the birth time, which is like this file was created on this date and time. Well, let me take a look at a stat on configs. So it was used recently, but if I touch it, notice that it updated all of those timestamps. It
Yeah.
updated the access time, the modified time, and the change time, even though I didn't look at the contents of the directory, I didn't change the contents of the directory, and I didn't change the permissions or ownerships on the directory. So touch can be used to update the timestamps on a file.
All right. Where to go? So you were just talking about permission. How about we talk about chmod and chgrp
Okay.
or chown even?
So when we look at a long listing or a stat, one of the things you see is this permissions field. And we actually did a whole episode just on permissions. So
And
I
you
don't
just
think
touched on another command, ls-l, the long listing.
fair. Um,
Just knocking them off, Scott.
Stop it. All right. So if we want to add a permission like the write permission for group, right? We chmod it. We change the mode of
Right.
this. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can specify what you want to have changed. And I would refer people to the permissions episode. It was a really early one. I bet producer Eric can find it and link it in the chat. But chmod will
Absolutely.
change the mode. And
Yep.
then Nate, you
Yep.
wanted to group something?
Yeah, so chmod, of course, changes the permissions that are affected on the owner and the group, but how do you change the owner and the group, right? We don't have that many groups, do we? Oh, groups are just that's the groups that are assigned to you, I think. But
Yes,
there you
because
go.
as a regular person, I
Right,
can only change the group owner to be a group I belong to. So I had to
right.
look at groups that I belong to figure out that, oh, I could change the group to wheel.
Yep.
And so I can change the group owner. And what
And
this
then of
means is
course that sorry, we're probably about to say the same thing. Go ahead.
that the group permissions now apply to people in this group. So
Right,
read write permission is now granted to anyone who belongs to the wheel group on this file.
right, right. And wheel, of course, is generally the folks that you trust with super user access. That's generally what the wheel group is for.
Yeah. We're
And
getting
then,
things time together, Nate.
yeah,
There are a couple of like random ones that we need to install some extra stuff for.
right. You want to talk about tree? Tree's a good one to know.
Yeah. Let me, and I'm just going to go ahead and install both,
Okay,
and, and then we can talk about them. So these two come from different RPMs. All right. So now that I've installed the tree RPM, I now have tree command.
right. Which is a great way to just kind of get a snapshot of what your directory structure looks like and what files are within it. Now, there's command line options that'll do things like only show you directories or show you files, or I don't know, there may be other filter options that I'm not familiar with. Most of the time I use tree, it's to do just what you did right there. Just get an idea of what the whole tree looks like.
Yeah, and in one of the labs that we recently published on lab.redhat.com, it's about building RPMs. And the very first step, it's like set up your directory structure to build RPMs. And then the author of that lab had us run tree, and then we could see that the
Hmm.
structure that was described had been set up.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, let's do this. Okay, Nate. So Uh, somebody on their Windows machine wants to be able to use Notepad to edit this password file that I just grabbed a copy of. But if I
Don't
send
do
it to
that.
them as it is today, they're going to open Notepad, and what's it going to look like?
I'm trying to remember which way this goes. I thought it was from a Windows machine to a Linux machine. You end up with carriage returns that show up as caret M. Like there's certain special characters that don't come through properly.
Yeah, so when we're looking at files on Linux, we expect every line to end with a new line character and
Right.
just a new character. But over in Windows world, they expect a carriage return new line combination to denote the end of a line. So if we take
Right.
this file and send it to our friend working on Windows, um, it only has new lines. And when they open it up in Notepad, it'll just be one giant line.
Right.
So we could do something to help them out with one of the other applications I just installed.
You can open it in Vim and add a bunch of carriage returns
I could do that.
using the search and replace feature, or you can use DOS to Unix
Yeah.
or
So,
Unix to DOS. There you go.
well, there's two commands. One
Yeah.
is take the thing and convert it to the other thing. So in this case,
Right.
it's take the Unix thing and convert it to a DOS thing, right? And if I look at password now, right, it actually, whoops, hold on, try that. You can see that what's done is it's converted all the new lines, which would be represented with just the dollar, to a carriage return new line, which is a control M dollar. So now
Right.
when the Notepad user opens it up, they'll actually see the everything on the line by itself the way they would expect. But then you run into another problem. They send it back to you,
Right.
and it's got all these carriage return new lines in it. And
Yep.
you can see that here it messes with your format. You probably didn't see it normally because if you just use cat,
It
that carriage
translates
return
it. Yeah.
line is actually invisible because it's a
Yep.
non-printable character. So I had
Yep.
to use that in order to be able to see that invisible character. And so when
Right.
I get a Windows file back from somebody, if it's something like a bash shell script, it's going to cause problems.
Oh
Python,
yeah.
it's going to cause problems because the interpreter is going to look at that line of code to execute, and then it's going to freak out because there's this weird control character at the end that it doesn't know what to do with.
Yeah. And just like you saw with cat, there are some things in the Linux world that don't care, right? But best practice is to convert these things because you don't know. Well, you might know, but some things are going to care, right? And you don't want that to blindside you.
Right. And so just like we took our Unix file and converted it to a DOS file, we can do the opposite.
Right.
And so it
And this, you know,
reformats.
for me, this was one of the earliest tools that I learned about that was more than just the standard moving around stuff. Because let's face it, a lot of people when they start out, they're coming from Windows, right? Today it might be from Mac OS, but a lot of people that are brand new to a terminal, especially if they're coming from a systems administration space, they probably have some familiarity with Windows, unless they're brand new to the field.
Yeah, and then there's other places where this pops up, Nate. Like if you use the integrated editor with GitHub, like in the browser,
Yeah.
it actually converts it to a Windows formatted file with carriage return line feeds. So if you then do like a git pull down to your Linux box, it's going to have this stuff in it because somebody edited that file using the editor that's native to the GitHub web browser. Um, that
Well, that's not
that
helpful.
may or may not have messed me up that one time. And so tools like DOS to Unix will convert that thing that
Right.
had DOS end of line character combination into a
Right.
Unix
Right.
file
And this
format.
this is great for, say you're doing file sharing or something on your Linux or Unix machines, and someone from Windows is writing text files in, and you need to parse those with something on the Linux side, right? DOS to Unix at first, and then parse it. Otherwise, you're going to end up with those carriage returns. Easily scriptable, as you saw, right? It's just run the command and it's done. There's no like anything.
Yep.
All right,
But one note,
so
replace the file with its converted equivalent, right? So it doesn't in
yeah,
place edit file and changes it in place.
Right.
So that's one thing to be aware of before you use it.
I don't know if there's a way to change that. Is there? Well, let's not let's not derail too deeply. But I am curious if maybe there's a way to tell it to put it to a separate file. That sounds like something that would would be helpful.
All right. So that's the end of our list, I think.
Mostly, we're kind of over time, so I think it's probably it's a good stopping point. Maybe we'll cover the rest in some other episode.
So Nate, what was your like of that list? What's the one that you think is a hidden gem that most people don't use but should use?
Hidden gem. So stat is pretty good, although it's a very specific use case, right? But hidden gem. I don't know. These are all pretty dir. Dir is the hidden gem.
Makes producer Eric's veins throb in his head.
No, honestly, I think the conversion, the DOS to Unix, Unix to DOS, that's really helpful if you're in an environment where that's important. If you're not, then you don't care and you're never going to touch it. So
So my hidden gem is a tree.
tree's a
Like
good one.
unpack a tar archive or something or a zip file, like it's really handy for just getting a quick look at what's in there and how it's organized.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, this has
So
been a fun little trip down the basics lane. Hope people have learned something today.
so next episode we're going to be
Hmm.
talking about how to get help on the system, right? Of course you can always use search engines and whatnot, but
Oh, so we're not going to talk about like psychologists or something?
maybe for you, just for you.
It's all those years working at a command line.
Oh,
I need help.
honestly, Nate, your manager is a complete piece of work.
Yeah, yeah, tough to work with. Anyway, so yeah, next episode, how to get help. That should
Yeah,
be
so
a good one. Maybe I'll learn something too.
join us next time for that. And then don't forget to tune in for RHEL Presents this, I think it's this upcoming week, where
Hmm.
we'll be talking about RHEL development.
I
And
think it's
our
2 weeks from
guests,
now because
or,
we had one
or
this week.
Eric's guests, are going to be Mike McGrath, the Vice President of Linux Engineering at Red Hat, and Gunnar Hellickson, who is our big boss man, who is the general manager of Red Hat Enterprise Linux Business at Red Hat. So, two super accomplished people. They make a lot of directional changes for RHEL. So, if
Yep.
you want to hear what they're saying, if you want to know what's going on with RHEL.
Yeah, should be a good one.
So, Nate, last chance to give some words of wisdom before we close it out.
Don't get lost at the terminal. Hopefully this helps.
All right, everyone. Happy end of the terminaling, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. Have a good one.